Okay, so you want to do food drive sorting. Food drive sorting is we get all of that food in through those barrels you see at the shopping markets and offices over the holidays. What happens is we get that in and now we need to check every single item to make sure it is still safe to distribute. We're looking at three things when we are looking at our general guidelines when we get the food in. We are looking to make sure that everything is sealed, everything still has proper protection around the food. We are looking to make sure that every single item has ingredients in English. That's very important. They don't need anything else, but they need ingredients in English. And then last but not least, we're looking to see whether or not this is a respectful item to send out into our community. So when we are starting with our sorting, we're going to be looking at canned goods, dried goods, boxed goods. Looking at canned goods, when we're looking at an item for rust, we're looking for rust on the sides, the bottom, or the top. A little bit of rust on any of the rims is okay, but if there's a lot of rust or if it's on the sides, tops, or bottoms of the cans, that is the metal actually starting to fall apart. It's degrading over time, so this is no longer a safe item to hand out. If you are looking in there like a couple of flecks, not a problem at all. It's when you start to get a lot of rust or kind of widespread rust, that's where the issue arises. When we're working, we're also going to be looking at dents and things like that. Canned goods can easily get dented. Small dents, not a problem at all. We're also looking at smoother dents, the ones that are nice and small. Those are perfectly fine. If a dent has corners or a crease, or if you run it on that edge and you feel a point, that is too dented. Metal doesn't bend in that way. Once it gets to a certain point, it just breaks, and it can cause a microscopic hole that allows bacteria into a canned item. So a couple of really small dents are not a problem. Anything really deep, anything really sharp, those will be pulled out for safety issues. An example of that is a very sharp dent here that very much alters that bottom shape of that can, or there is a crease created by that dent. We're just trying to make sure that the metal itself is still relatively in good shape. Small dents, not a problem, but once the metal starts to get really affected, that's when we're going to be pulling it out. When we're looking at condition of items, we're also going to make sure that they're sealed, make sure that everything is safe to go. So when we have cans, it's pretty easy to tell if it's not leaking, it's not an open can. But when we're working with our jarred goods, it's a little bit harder. So when we're looking at our jarred goods, we're going to be looking at a couple of different types of lids. We have our screw tops, we have our friction lids, we have our pop lids, things like that. So when we're doing this, if you can take the top off without breaking a seal, do so. We would much rather a volunteer accidentally open something than send something already opened out into the community. So when we're looking, we're like, oh, I don't know if this has a seal. There's nothing on the top prevent me from taking this off, so I'm gonna take this off and I'm gonna see. There is a seal on the inside. I'm gonna tap it to make sure it is still there. Seal on the inside, this is perfectly fine. This is a closed item, this is good to go. Peanut butter is our problem child. It happens a lot. It can be perfectly fine looking from the outside, but when you have that top, we definitely want to take that top off, and then we want to check that interior seal. This is what I call finger peanut butter. Someone has already enjoyed part of it, so we are not going to be handing this out. This is an open container. If it has a plastic neck ring, if it is a jar with a pressure fit like a button in the center, those just make sure that that is still secure. If it's a screw top, take that off, make sure that it is sealed on the inside. And when we get little jars like this happens often with like Parmesan cheeses or spices, things like that. We want to make sure that we are actually taking the entire lid off, not just opening the flap. Because looking inside on the flap, let me show you. It looks like it's perfectly fine. That seal is still there. But when I go to take off the entire lid to check that seal for myself, the seal is off and the inside of the food is now vulnerable. So that's what we're doing. We're just making sure that those interior seals are still intact. When we're working with dry goods, interior seals, things like that, we're going to be looking at the condition of the food itself. So cereal boxes, these are nice and flimsy. They get broken very easily. If the bag on the inside is still secure, this is a closed container. We want to make sure that that bag stays with its box, but the box does not need to be closed. It can get squished and broken open. It is not the issue here. If we're looking at boxes like rice-a-roni or pasta or mac and cheese, things like that, we are going to be making sure that that box is in good condition. There's no water damage and there's no tearing or holes. because these guys are just straight up open to the environment. As soon as that box is open, this is no longer a closed container. So that is the status of making sure it's still safe, making sure that we can still hand it out on a safety stance. The next thing we're going to be looking at is whether or not it has ingredients in English. Ingredients in English are very important. That is the one requirement. It doesn't need to have fancy labeling. It does not need to have any sort of nutrition box or informational about advertising, nothing like that. It needs to have ingredients in English. That's all it needs. So when we're looking, we're going to be checking to make sure these cans have their original labels. We're going to make sure that all of these items have labeling that does tell what is in there. A thing that we get a lot, unfortunately, is homemade labels. Homemade labels, unfortunately, do not count as original labeling. We cannot hand this out. Someone did photocopy this label and then taped it onto the can, but we cannot say for certain that that's what is in this can. It's just too uncertain, so we can't hand this out. We will also get relabeled items. If it is a relabeled item, this was processed through the second harvest of Silicon Valley. This one we can say is okay because this is a reputable organization and they put who they are on that label replacement so that if you have questions or concerns, you can reach out to them. This is completely anonymous and this is we know who did it. So that's what we're looking for when it comes to homemade or new labels. Otherwise, we would like to keep with the labeling that is already on the can. When we're looking at dry goods, we're again looking to make sure that our labels are with our items. So that box of cereal, again, the bag is perfectly safe, but the bag by itself has no ingredients on it. So it has to stay with the box because that box has that ingredients panel. Very important that the bag is with the box. You will find bags of oatmeal or rice or things like that without their proper packaging. It's in a Ziploc bag, it is in a jar, things like that, and unfortunately we can't hand that out. We're also going to be looking at things like snacky foods, things like this. This is a Ritz crackers box. The Ritz inside are perfectly fine to eat, but they don't have any ingredients on them either. So if we found the box floating around, we could totally hand that out. Yes, it's open. Yes, it's missing a couple of sleeves, but what is in there is still safe, still sealed, and good to go. If we find this guy floating around in a bin all by itself, we cannot hand that out. We don't know where it came from. We don't know what's in it. If we find them sitting in the same box, we cannot combine them because we cannot say for 100% certain that this came out of this box. And if it didn't, we don't want to combine them back together. This issue is when we have recalls or lot numbers that are of concern. If this gets put in with a lot number, it can get pulled out with a false positive. Or if it is part of a recall and it gets put into a different box, then it is going out into the community as a recalled item that is not known. So, can't mix and match labels, can't mix and match boxes, and everything has to have its ingredients. Fruit cups and like Easy Mac, things like that, sometimes they'll have ingredients printed on them, sometimes they won't. You'll need to check to make sure. Items like this, no ingredients, can't hand it out. If it's applesauce that says ingredients, apples on the top, it's good to go. It has its ingredients and it's still sealed. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We're making sure everything has its ingredients. The third thing we're looking at is whether or not this is respectful. This part is the most subjective. We are worried more about whether or not we are being respectful. Food safety is less of a concern with best by dates. There's no regulation, there is no uniformity throughout the industry, there is no standard operating procedures. Best by dates are really just kind of whatever the companies want to put on for various different reasons. So when we're looking at best by dates, we're gonna look at them with some skepticism. We're gonna go, we're not sure if we want to follow that just because this food is still probably perfectly fine. So when we're looking at that, you guys will have a cute little cheat sheet that we have made. It has a box full of all of those best by dates. In general, canned goods, if they're not in bad shape, they're good for about 5 years after that best by date. Dry goods, it really does depend. That being said, if you do not find a best by date, if you're looking at something and go, yeah, there's no date on this can, if the can is in good shape and has ingredients, that's all that matters. We do not need best by dates on everything. When we're looking, we're gonna really make sure that, again, it's that respect aspect of it. This guy is probably so fine, he is nothing but sugar. However, this looks like it came out of my grandmother's cupboard. This is no longer respectful to give out. If it looks like it came from the last century, it probably did. So when we're looking at stuff like this, we're gonna be looking primarily at, would you feel like we respected you if we gave this to you in a food distribution? So, best by dates. They're there, you can go by them, but in general, focus more on whether or not it's safe to distribute, still closed and in good shape, and looking at whether or not it has its ingredients. And there are a couple of little things that you will find while out there. The lead volunteer or the staff person working with you will be able to answer some more questions and help out with the kind of bits and pieces, portions of it. But in general, again, making sure it's safe to eat, making sure it has ingredients, and making sure it's respectful. That is pretty much this presentation. Couple of little notes is that once we have all of this food sorted, we are then going to be putting it into our categories. We have dried goods, so boxes, bags, things like that. I'm blanking on a third item, but boxes and bags, things like that, those are dried goods. We have canned goods, which are jars and bottles and containers, things like that. Those are all canned goods. Those are our categories. We have dry goods and canned goods. They're loose on purpose. We're trying mainly to get them out of the warehouse as fast as possible. If you're unsure about something, go with your best guess. You are probably correct. Our third category is drinks. That is an entirely separate category. Don't worry about it. Coffee, teas, waters, flavorings, things like that, milks, all of that will go into our drinks bin to be sorted later by a team that has been trained on how to do our drink sorting. So that's what we've got for you today. Please make sure you're answering questions when you are out there. This is the hardest job at the food bank. We want to make sure that you are having a good time doing it and that we are being safe with our food that we are distributing. So make sure you're asking questions. If you are confused, let someone know. This is very much a community effort. We'll be able to answer questions and help you out while you're out there. And I promise it will make more sense when you get out into the warehouse and start really working with this donated food product. So thank you so much for listening. If you do have questions, ask your staff or lead volunteers. Other than that, hope you have a good time out there in that warehouse, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon as well. So thank you, everybody.